Remember when Doug Ford created a TV ad featuring Ronald Reagan? Well, now, American officials have used a Canadian icon, arguably more culturally important than Reagan, to promote an illegal war against Venezuela. A bit of background here. The US military has been making remote military strikes on small boats operating off the coast of Venezuela. The Trump administration has claimed that these are narco terrorist boats, which of course is a made up term, and that these boats are packed with fentanyl bound for the United States. I'm not sure if I can explain how patently ridiculous this claim is, but I'm going to try. First of all, if these people are drug traffickers, that in no way warrants a death penalty. In the US, the average drug trafficking conviction results in between 6 and 7 years in prison. And there is a life sentence available, and that is a possibility. About 1 in 2,000 convictions actually result in a life sentence, and those are reserved for kingpin trafficking participation. And even a life sentence is not a death sentence. There is no US death penalty for drug trafficking. Next, fentanyl does not actually come from Venezuela. Cocaine comes from Venezuela, but it's fentanyl that's causing these significant number of overdose deaths, and that's what the administration has claimed they are stopping with this action. And just an FYI, fentanyl ingredients actually generally come from China and are mostly sent to Mexico for processing into fentanyl before crossing the land border into the United States. Okay, next. Suspected drug traffickers are supposed to be arrested. They're supposed to have the opportunity to present their defense in a court of law with a jury of peers. That is called due process. You cannot just unilaterally, from a distance, become judge, jury, and literal executioner. That's what violent fascist authoritarians do. Now, if you're wondering what this has to do with a Canadian cultural icon, I'm getting to that. Stick with me. Because I want to talk briefly about these boats. I actually have some boating experience. I've spent a fair amount of time on the water. And I can tell you that these boats are not capable of making the crossing from Venezuela to the United States. The closest point, mainland to mainland, between the two countries is over 1,300 nautical miles. That's about 2,500 kilometers. In flat water and calm conditions, these boats can travel at perhaps 25 knots. It's a speedboat. It's up on a plane, which, if you know speedboats, it's not really sustainable for long periods of time. But if it was, they could do that trip in about 54 hours. So that would mean 54 hours of perfect weather. Of course, predicting the next 54 hours of weather across a broad, area of the ocean before even leaving on such a trip is basically impossible. Also, and this is critical, this kind of boat cannot carry enough fuel for 54 hours of continuous operation. It can't carry enough fuel for even a quarter of that. Plus, there's no shelter. There's no accommodation for crew sleeping. There's no facility to prepare meals. These are not long-distance boats. These are local boats, day boats, fishing boats. Clearly, what the administration is claiming to justify this action can only be described as complete horseshit. So with that in mind, I want to say one thing here, because this is probably the most important thing I'm going to say in this video. It is a very small step for this US administration to go from blowing up drug trafficking boats to then saying, oh, well, now there's trucks, and they'll blow up the trucks that are in Venezuela. Which might happen, because keep your eyes on the news. And then it's a very small step for them to then say, oh, and now these trucks are in Mexico, and so we're going to blow them up there. And, or for that matter, now there's trucks in Canada that are fentanyl trucks, or cars, or houses, or people. Those are all baby steps from where they are now to where that could go. Now, getting back to the topic at hand, something happened that triggered a social media reaction from Pete Hegseth. Now, this is the man whose only qualification to be Secretary of Defense is that Trump saw him on Fox News and thought that he had a right look to his face to be a guy who could be Secretary of Defense. Of course, Trump changed the name of the Department of Defense to Department of War, so now Hegseth is the Secretary of War. This, of course, from a president who is desperate for a Nobel Peace Prize, which I'm going to go out on a limb here and say probably isn't going to happen. So a few days ago, the Washington Post published an article claiming that immediately following a September 2nd strike on a boat off the Venezuelan coast, surveillance revealed that 2 of the original 11 crew were still alive, and they were clinging to floating scraps of what used to be their boat. According to the article, the Secretary of War, ordered a second strike to kill those defenseless people. Okay, so if you accept that these boats are somehow a threat to the security of the United States, and that the strikes against them are somehow justified, killing the survivors of a strike who are floating in the water is literally the definition, the textbook definition, of a war crime. Now, the military lawyers who are supposed to advise the Secretary of Defense of War could have advised on this, but Trump fired them all. And even beyond the US laws, this goes well into international law. We're talking about Geneva Convention. And by the way, Mr. President, your Supreme Court blanket immunity does not apply at The Hague. Hashtag just saying. After the publication of that Washington Post article, the Trump administration bullshit machine went into overtime on social media. And this included Hegseth himself. The Secretary of War, actually we should call him the Secretary of War-Crimes, shared a post on social media that makes inappropriate use of a Canadian cultural icon. I'm talking about Franklin the Turtle. Okay, listen here, my American friends. We shared a video of Ronald Reagan. All we did was share his actual real speech, clearly depicting his actual beliefs on tariffs, in the hopes that some of you would realize that your tariffs against us are harmful to both our countries. Your toddler-in-chief reacted to Reagan's anti-tariff message by increasing tariffs. Americans didn't like us using an American icon, and now you have desecrated Franklin. You put Franklin, a preschool turtle who could count by twos and tie his shoes, into a military attack helicopter blowing up Venezuela fishermen. Friends, I am pissed. Do not use our sacred preschool turtle to promote your murder. And also, maybe, stop murdering. In unrelated news, Venezuela has the largest untapped oil reserve in the world. I'm Steve Sandford. You're watching Dominion Report.